Hej och välkomna till det här frukostseminariet. Det är ett samarrangemang mellan Svesif och Sjunde AP-fonden. Och jag heter Charlotta Davidowski-Sydstrand och jag jobbar till vardags på Sjunde AP-fonden som hållbarhetsstrateg, men jag sitter också i Svesifs styrelse. Så ni som inte känner till Svesif, så är det ett Sveriges forum för hållbara investeringar. Vi har ungefär 100 medlemmar idag. Ni som inte är medlemmar tycker jag ska fundera över det, för man får väldigt mycket för sitt medlemskap. Och sen vill jag passa på att flagga för den 7 november har vi en stor nordisk konferens för alla siffar i Norden. Och om ni inte har anmält er till den så gör det, för det är kommer att bli en väldigt spännande dag. Sen ska inte jag prata mer om det. I'll turn to English and I will present Johan Florén, who is head of ESG and communication at AP7, who will guide us through this day and this morning's session.
So let me start with the microphones. Even though we can hear each other pretty well and you might have questions, etc., we're going to have a microphone for you, and it's because we are webcasting this. So if someone outside want to follow, we have to talk into the microphone. Otherwise, he won't pick it up. And the topic for today is water, and we're going to look at water from 3 different perspectives. We're going to start with the engagement perspective. I mean, if you're an investor and you own water companies, what can you do? Then we're going to move on to water as an investment, of course, within a sustainability framing and what it means. And finally, we're going to have a little fireside chat about we have a lot of sustainable and responsible investors are actually looking for investments today. It's hard to find, and when you have good investments, there's a lot of competition. And at the same time, there's a great need out there for more investments. And so we're going to have a discussion around this a little bit strange situation, since there's a lot of money and there's a lot of need, and still there's something in between that doesn't work. And why is that? And we also have this little report that we have printed, and you can pick it on the way out. It's sort of summarizing what we talk about today. But we're going to start with Tytti Kaasinen from Sustainalytics, that is going to introduce us to engagement with water companies.
Great.
Do you have a microphone?
I think so. Yes, seems to be working.
And before we start, just one word. What is it that you have done?
Engaged. In one word. Hopefully I can say a few more, but yes, we've assessed and engaged companies in 3 focus sectors in the past 3 years.
Yeah. So, floor is
Great.
yours.
Thank you. Is this where I... No? No.
Which is just a peer-to-peer device, should work, but there's always something.
I'm just glad it wasn't me, which is new with technology.
I think it's powerful. It's Microsoft software, that's why. Unclear error? Good.
Right? So this is what Johan just told you. And this is me. So as Johan mentioned, I work at Sustainalytics, and I'm just going to go through benchmarking exercise and engagement findings that we've experienced in the last 3 years in collaboration with investors. And I presume that most people here know Sustainalytics, particularly as maybe some of your logo is shown on this slide among our clients, but we are a ESG research and engagement services provider. for over 500 investors across the world. And I've been in, many of you might know me from GS, where I worked before, and the explanation for that is that GS became part of Sustainalytics in January. So now that same work that we'll be doing at GS on the engagement front continues under Sustainalytics. So the 3-year project that we've had on water, it was in 3 parts. So first in 2017, we published a benchmarking report in cooperation with AP7 and Actium as well, a Dutch asset manager. And there we focused on 3 sectors in particular: food and beverage, garment and mining sectors. And we looked at those companies' water-related preparedness and also their exposure to water-stressed developing countries, to really tie this investigation both into the kind of disclosure and water management aspect, but also to SDG 6, which looks at water and sanitation. So on the back of that benchmarking report, we then commenced an engagement project with 6 investors. They were from 5 different countries, so that was a very nice broad collaboration. And for 2 years then we focused on around 20 companies from these 3 focus sectors, which we had identified in the benchmarking as being kind of medium to low performers and having medium to high exposure to water-stressed developing countries. So there we really kind of went from this broad high-level picture to deep dive conversations with companies about various aspects of water management. And in addition to these 20 companies which were identified a bit of laggards, we also engaged with 5 companies that were leaders to really try and then kind of take their best practices as well and push them to continue pushing the envelope and pull the sector up with them. So that one then finished in March this year, and then we repeated the benchmarking in cooperation with AP7 in Q2 this summer, and published a report in June to really look at what had happened in the 2 interim years while we had been engaging, looking at what had happened with the water disclosure and preparedness on the broad front. And obviously we were excited, or a little bit nervous, but looking forward to seeing if our engagement had had any impact on the companies that we had been having dialogues with. So just briefly outlining the KPIs that we looked at. So because these three sectors are so different, obviously, in terms of their water impacts and risks, we had a sector-specific KPI for all of them as well. But then we had 5 universal KPIs too, which were quite obvious in terms of border responsibility, policy, and then targets and performance on intensity. And pollution goals as well. So maybe I won't say too much more about that to leave time for talking about the results. So these are the key findings from this second benchmarking that we did this year. So overall, we really don't see much improvement. I think that's the key finding, unfortunately. Things haven't really moved much in the 2 years. And obviously that wasn't what we were hoping to see. We were hoping to see that companies had really taken the grip of the issue, seeing as it is quite urgent and it's obvious and it's business relevant. But according to our assessment, that's not really the case. And one part of it is disclosure not still being on par with what we would expect from companies exposed to this issue particularly. And yeah, as you see there, 30% of the companies improved their total score, which was nice, but 39% actually went back. So all in all, not really great. But generally, there were mostly small changes in the scores, and I think it was 86% of companies that only had they were kind of like within 3 points of the 2017 score. So they haven't really gone back or forward much. And sector-wise, mining is the best one. We think that it's because they are closest to the impacts. They are often seen in the communities where they are present as possibly even the provider of water and sanitation. So maybe for them it's more obvious the need to tackle these issues is more obvious, and they may be expected to report more about water issues as well as than the 2 other sectors that we looked at. But having said that, the garment industry improved most. So when we look at the average scores, it seems like the garment sector is starting to take more action on the water management and stewardship front. Maybe unsurprisingly, the most common measure that the company had taken was having a water policy in place. So there, I should say the average score 1.8. To put it in context, the best score is 0, and the worst score per indicator is 3. So 1.8 is still kind of closer to the worst score than the perfect score. So it's still not ideal. And 25% of the companies still have no water policy even. So obviously that you would expect that to be kind of a starting point. So there's clearly a lot more to be done there. The kind of other bad news is the water intensity, and that was the KPI where we really saw biggest change. This was really not a KPI where things had stayed the same. Actually, 73% of the companies had the worst score on this KPI, meaning that they had no disclosure on water intensity, or that their water intensity had deteriorated in the 2 years since we did the first benchmarking. And there the average score had gone from 1.9 to 2.5 in the 2 to 3 years in between the benchmarking. So, and I think this is in line with the CDP's findings as well about companies' water withdrawals having increased. So it makes sense. We seem to be getting this message from different directions. The board level responsibility was kind of one glimmer of good news. That was the KPI where companies had actually improved most. Still, a third of the companies have no board level responsibility for water sustainability, but relative to the other KPIs, we see that this is where companies are improving. And that's obviously good news, because we think that in order for any ESG issue to be properly integrated and taken into account in strategy and in actual actions, the board responsibility and the buy-in from the top is really crucial. So hopefully with this board level responsibility and them having to be more involved is kind of then gonna initiate some kind of action on the other fronts as well. Maybe that's all I'll say on this. And on this slide, it just shows the subsector averages as well. So you can see on the, I don't know if there's a pointer. No. Okay. Well, you can see the kind of sector averages for mining, garment, food and beverages, and industrial conglomerates, which we looked at well, where they had activities in these sectors. But then all the other ones there are the sub-sector breakdowns. And I won't go through them all, obviously, but just to point out that you can see the companies with the worst scores. So remember, the higher the score, the worse. We see food retail and food distributors, whereas here at the better end, we have brewers, soft drinks manufacturers, and also many of the mining companies. And for us, that's a sign that the companies that are, again, closer to the actual impacts and risks and responsibilities are better at managing water issues. Whereas with food retailers, distributors, supermarkets, there are so many links away from the actual water usage and disposals that maybe they aren't expected by stakeholders to say so much, and maybe they haven't really realized what all this means for them. These, by the way, all this information is in the report, which is publicly available, so don't worry about writing things down. All this can be found in the report as well. In terms of the KPIs, this is kind of what I said already, but just to kind of illustrate there with colors that you can see again, mining tends to be doing the best in most KPIs. That's the orange pillar. And when we look at the sector-specific KPIs, you can see that mining, there at the top with 1.4 as the average score, got the best score of all the KPIs. So this was looking at the community impacts and how mining companies are aware and addressing those. So across all the KPIs, that was the one where we saw companies performing best. Okay, so then the interesting news. So as I said in the beginning, one of the purposes of doing these two benchmarkings 2 years apart was to look at the engagement impact. And we really saw this a good way of kind of seeing and measuring in a concrete manner to what extent the investor dialogues are actually changing company practices. So we were potentially setting ourselves to fail, but luckily that didn't happen. it was good news. We found that the engagement companies actually improved a lot more than the others. So as you might remember, I said earlier that 30% of the larger group had improved. In the engagement group, it was 65%. And whereas in the larger group, 39% had gone backwards, in the engagement group, it was less. It was 18%, because 18 had stayed the same. So for us, this is obviously really exciting. And while we never really doubted it ourselves, this really shows at least some kind of evidence that engagement can really, in a concrete manner, change companies, and investors can play an active role and positive role in pushing companies to become more aware and also take action in terms of their practices and disclosure when it comes to water. And ultimately, obviously, the hope is that that will then have impact on the river basin level and on the people on the ground. So so they're looking at the table or the graph on the right. You can see the average scores. So the two first pillars show the whole universe. So there you can see that actually, again, remember, the higher the worse. So so the companies actually deteriorated slightly. So the average score was worse in 2019 than 2017. But then with the two following pillars, you can see that in the grey pillar that the engagement company's average score was 11.7 in 2017. And the assessment that we did this year, it was 10.1. So compared to the trend in the larger group, very much more positive there. And then if you're wondering about the last pillar, it's if we had taken also into account the company's information that they told us in the engagement into account. So the other four pillars are based on public information, and I should say that us doing the engagement didn't do the assessment, so this was legit, it was objective. We weren't kind of like giving companies more favorable scores, so just a disclosure there. But the last pillar does take into account what the companies had told us. So I think this tells two stories. So both the companies seem to be doing a lot more than they disclose. There's a clear disclosure gap, which is good news in a way that even though our results show that things aren't really great, it seems like companies are actually doing a lot more than what they put in their public reports or even CDP. And the kind of for the investor perspective and from the engagement perspective, obviously this shows that apart from impact on companies, which ultimately is what the engagement is about, is also a good opportunity to get information which is not readily in the public domain. So companies might be withholding lots of good kind of practices in terms of their risk management, due diligence, stewardship activities that just aren't there in the reports. But through talking to companies directly and giving them the opportunity and kind of prodding them a little bit to tell more, investors can get a lot more useful, relevant information and reassurances from the companies. So I think that's good both for companies and investors. Companies get the chance to kind of tell their story and speak to a receptive audience to put their side across, and investors get the information that they need, but the companies haven't really woken up to in terms of disclosing it yet. Like I said earlier, we also include sector leaders in the engagement, and to us that's a really big aspects of these kind of thematic engagements that we do as well, in order to have the impact beyond the individual companies. Because leaders, even though they themselves might not need kind of too much additional push, but in terms of actually solving the problem and improving the practices on the sector level and having an impact on the ground, it's really important that leaders also get the support from investors, that investors are behind them, and we agree that they should be continue pushing forwards and collaborating with the potential laggards and really trying to make a difference. So this is why we are also engaging the leaders. And of course, with leaders, you can explore a little bit more advanced topics as well, which laggards might not be ready to talk about yet. In the case of water, human right to water, for example, and also to get best practices about how they're tackling things like public policy challenges and local issues that they might be facing in different locations. So that's also just a good reminder for investors when it comes to engagement, that there is also good opportunity, good potential for investors to keep pushing the best performance as well. So all in all, we can conclude that water seems to be important, and from our talks with companies, they are recognizing that water might have material impacts on them, and some have started doing things, but it's not a priority in most cases, even with these three sectors, which do face really concrete business risk when it comes to water. So some companies are saying, like in the garment sector, for example, that where the supply chain water impact is the big issue, they might be saying like, sure, we understand, we are going to be reliant on these materials and we need water in the processes. However, as we all know, in the garment supply chain, there's a lot of issues when it comes to the social aspects, and the companies are kind of quite honestly and frankly saying that they have to sort out the working conditions first and water comes next. So water seems to be kind of this always the bridesmaid, never the bride, that is kind of always there bubbling under, waiting for its turn to come to the front and shine. But it seems to be always playing the second fiddle to climate change in the environmental front and social issues when it comes to supply chain. So hopefully through these discussions and investors bringing up the topic, companies can be reminded that with water particularly, it's not too late. With climate change, it's often about mitigation adaptation, but with water there's a lot to be done still, rather than having to go through it the hard way, like getting the issues and then tackling them. So we could really encourage companies to proactively avoid the disruptions to the operations and the costly impacts that might have. Otherwise, disclosure gap, again, I think that's somewhere where investors could and should really play a part to remind companies that it's really important that they talk about these issues. Investors want and need and use the disclosure, be it through CDP or through improving their own reporting. I think standardized reporting is good, so in that sense CDP is helpful. But generally, just talk to companies, remind companies that you're interested in water and you think this is a risk that they should be tackling proactively and reactively as relevant to that particular company. One thing where climate and water are very different is the nature of the problem and how the impacts play out. Climate is quite global. It's the challenges are global, the solutions can be global to some extent, but with water, because most things happen on the river basin level, it depends so much where you're located about your specific risk, and also in terms of sector, how much and what ways you need water in your operations. It really has to be taken into account, this context that the company is operating, both in terms of business, but also geographically. So it makes engagement a little bit more challenging. You really need to understand the company's realities in order to really ask meaningful questions and push them the right way. But what we also find that collaboration and companies coming together, particularly geographically, is the best way for them to together, not having to deal with these issues on their own, even if they're individual challenges, but working with others is often the best way and most efficient way, also most cost-efficient way to tackle these things. And companies that we've spoken to in the engagement stage really recognize this, and the best practices that we hear really kind of take advantage of these opportunities, but it is really still underutilized. So this is really where companies would benefit from looking for partners, both in the company sense, but also with other stakeholders. And again, would be in line with the SDG 6, where the integrated water management of all the different stakeholders working together rather than in silos really comes into play and kind of illustrates how water must be tackled together. So because of all this, for us as Sustainalytics, we will obviously continue engaging with water. There's clearly still need. And in light of these aspects that I've just highlighted, that is so localized and the collaborative approach is the way forward, our new engagement project in water, which we're kind of ready to start any day, we'll look at localized water management. So we will focus on companies that are present in like they share a water basin where there are elevated risks, and we will that way then both improve the companies on their individual level, both to help them understand this local context, but also obviously illustrate the companies on the kind of macro level, what challenges and risks water poses to them. But also what we're really hoping to do with this engagement, and I know that many investors are really keen on this kind of engagement impact and kind of concrete impact on the ground. So by focusing on 2 watersheds, we really hope that we can, at the end of the 3-year project, really pinpoint what has happened in that particular location. And while we might not be able to claim additionality, hopefully we can kind of say how investors have been at least contributing and supporting and encouraging these concrete changes and improvements on the ground. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Otherwise, that's me.
So thank you, Titi. Let me just start by asking, I mean, you have engaged a lot over many years. Is there anything particular about the water engagement, water sector?
Apart from it being my favorite topic.
Yeah, that's one. Okay.
I think what with water is a little bit what I was touching on earlier, that it's kind of recognized, but it doesn't, the urgency is not there compared to many other topics. That it's weird because water is so concrete and it should be easy for companies to, it's so tangible. If you don't have water, you don't have water. We all come in touch with water every day. So it puzzles me a little bit why I've been engaging with water specifically as well, closer to 10 years, I think. And it's always been the same story. It's somewhere there in the background. It's kind of a runner-up, but it never gets promoted to kind of to the top table. And it confuses me. I don't understand, because it's so obvious and it's material and it's interesting and exciting. But companies aren't really sharing my enthusiasm most of the time, it seems. But yeah, so join me.
Maybe we should give it a name, the second fiddle syndrome or something.
Or the bridesmaid.
Bridesmaid, yeah.
Yeah, let's work on that.
Never get married, always get the flowers. Yeah.
Not sure if that will sell it that way.
Well, anyway.
We'll work on it.
No, but I thought it sounded like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit if you're an investor and want to engage. If 25% of the companies don't even have a policy, which would be a natural starting point, and it's obvious that you can have an impact. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So we're going to have a rapid pace here, but a few questions. Mikael, if you can, it's coming up.
Yes, I would like to know if you can elaborate a little bit on the process with engaging companies. How many times did you speak with them, meet them? Did they get your first report? What did it look like?
Sure. Yeah. So because this was a 2-year engagement, and obviously there are big things that we were expecting to happen, we spoke to most of the companies twice a year. So part of this kind of thematic engagements that we have is that we provide biannual reporting, where we measure the companies against the KPIs that we had set. So between those biannual reports, we always try to speak to the company to get more information from them and have a conference call to really dig deep into the topics through a conversation. But also we exchange obviously emails on specific questions. So there is ongoing dialogue with all the companies. And we do share them, the results as well, to kind of explain to them what is it that we are communicating to investors. So for us, it's really the transparency. If we expect transparency from the companies, then we should also be prepared to be transparent towards the companies ourselves. So we did share with them the kind of our assessment. And also at the end of the engagement, when because of the set timeline, we were forced to end the dialogues, we suggested to them what we saw from our perspective still as the key points to address for them to kind of continue, hopefully, addressing these things as next steps.
Okay, great. So, short one.
So did you experience any information asymmetry between yourselves and the companies? Either that since the problem is very local, that they themselves knew a lot about the local specific circumstances and you would take their sort of account more at face value, there's more of a risk of that, or the other way around, that they're not knowledgeable enough about the water issue?
The latter, unfortunately, particularly when it comes to local issues. So some companies are really good at this, so they really taking this on board and are really empowering the local management to do a lot. But with most companies, it's still kind of on this overarching, possibly water policy, doing overall risk assessment across all operations. And then obviously the next step after the risk assessment would then be to focus on the hotspots and the locations where there are particularly high risks. But there wasn't much that companies could share actually from the local specifics, unfortunately, apart from the leaders, obviously.
Okay, great. Thank you, Titi. Let's have an applause. And we'll, without further ado, move on from water problems, or at least risks, to water opportunities. We're going to have a discussion about water as investments, and we're going to look at it both from a financial and from a sustainability perspective. And Noel Halloran from KBI Investors, why don't you introduce yourself, and we have more discussion afterwards.
So thank you, Johan. Good morning, everybody, and congratulations on your excellent water report, which we absolutely relate to. In terms of a little bit about KBI Global Investors, so we are a boutique asset manager. We're based in Dublin. We're a global asset manager with about 95% of our clients invested, with us globally. So we like to say when it comes to water, we have clients from Sydney to Stockholm to San Francisco. So it's a broad appeal from that perspective as an investor. We are majority owned by Amundi, who people probably know better than KBI Global Investors. And on the bottom right-hand side, I suppose, sustainability, responsible investing is absolutely core to our DNA, as it has been for almost 3 decades. So I'm Noel O'Halloran. I'm the Chief Investment Officer. I've been with the firm since 1992. So I also have a long track record with the firm from that perspective. So it's interesting listening to Titi in terms of your perspectives on water. We come at water as a pure investment manager, a much more narrow focus, but we will absolutely echo a lot of the sentiments that we've just heard. So, I mean, when it comes to water, the facts about water are frightening and somewhat scary. And hence the whole echoing of the bridesmaid never being the bride. So we identified back in 1999 water as, from our perspective as an investment manager, a multi-decade source of alpha. We just saw that water is the most critical resource on the planet. There is no alternative, yet the facts are pretty scary. And in terms of the bridesmaid, the facts are getting worse, they're not getting better. So the one good thing I would say is, the notion of Irish people talking about a shortage of water was somewhat amusing to some. 20 or 30 years later, we've seen crises in Michigan, Flint, Michigan. We've seen almost Cape Town running out of water recently. So finally, these issues are coming to the fore, and eventually it will become the bride, I suppose. But the facts you can read yourself. They're pretty scary. I think from an investor point of view, why did we identify water? I suppose, let's just remind ourselves about some of the facts about water. So of all the water that's on the planet, only 1% is available for usage. The other 99% is in the polar ice caps, it's in the oceans, it's just not available. And of that 1%, again, just listening a little bit to the previous discussion, 70% is used by agriculture. So, agriculture probably isn't represented in the listed equity sector very much. So the 24 GICS groups we looked at, agriculture is not really there. Industry is there. Industry is 20%. And we humans make up 10% of water demand. So to tackle the water shortage, probably the first thing to look at is agriculture, then industry, and then humans. And because we're human, we think it's the other way around. So on the supply side, it's limited, it's finite, it doesn't grow. On the demand side, the scary thing when it comes to water is it's growing at twice population growth. So we all know the mega themes of urbanization, globalization, another couple of billion people on the planet by 2050. So, time is definitely going to create this bride, for sure. Even if people are still in denial, it's going to happen, I suppose. And as investors, we've seen that as an opportunity, both from an investment point of view and from an impact point of view. So it's one of those unique sort of investments that combines both from that perspective. We coined the phrase, the 5 indisputables. We've talked about this now for almost 20 years. So it is uniquely an investment case where there's limited supply, increasing demand, which is good. Increased regulation. So we are seeing increased regulation. That's good. Policymakers are finally getting it. And the need, I suppose, the solution out of all of that is you're going to need a lot more investment. And AP7 have captured this in their report. A lot more investment in both infrastructure solutions and in technological solutions to water. So depending on who you read, it's sort of 17 trillion investment is required by 2030. That probably goes to something like 50 trillion by 2050. So when we talk to asset owners and they talk about infrastructure, they think about roads and rail and ports and telecoms. And you've got to kind of point out to people, look, 40% of the infrastructure investment that's going to be required is actually in water. So people still haven't quite got the water story, but it's coming. So that's our 5 indisputables. And in terms of how we think about water as an investment manager, it's about solutions providers. So in a way, the previous discussion from Sustainalytics is the problem creators, the industries that are creating problems from water usage or overusage or waste or whatever. The companies we have identified are those that are bringing solutions to those companies. So it's a much narrower lens, I suppose, from that perspective. And it's all around infrastructure and technology from that perspective. So that's our mindset. So it's a much narrower mindset. So to give you a perspective on that, if there's kind of 1,800 stocks in the MSCI Global Index, we invest in about 1% of those. So it's about 160 stocks out of 1,800. So it's a much more narrow, more punchy, I suppose, if you like, investment universe. We have a team of specialists who are running the strategies, and they're dedicated to doing nothing else but these. And they invest both from the alpha side, but also when talking about engagement, Matt, Catherine and Martin, myself and our 2 sustainability analysts, we would do our own engagement with the water companies. So I talked about solutions providers. So if you're going to solve the problems in water, to us, it's about, decreasing demand, increasing supply, improving or assuring the quality of water. So they're the kind of companies we look at. So when people say, oh, what do you mean by increasing supply? Well, it's kind of obvious. Desalination is one thing that always comes up. It's seen as the holy grail. 99% of the water is in the oceans, et cetera, et cetera. Why don't you just desalinate it? You're going to have big climate change issues if you do. It's heavily energy dependent. There's big environmental issues. So locally, you can do desalination. But the big solution when it comes to water is water reuse. So at present, about 2% of water globally is reused. On all projections, if you're going to try and match the supply-demand issue, you'll need to be 20 to 25% of water reused. A number of our companies have very strong technologies when it comes to sort of water reuse. So Barcelona is seen as a kind of a model city. Right now, about 10% of water in Barcelona is reused. And that's the way the world is going, I guess, from that perspective. Similarly, I talked about agriculture. You're seeing more and more, obviously, about grey water turning to brown water, farmers using more water, reusing it on the land rather than wasting it. Irrigation's a big issue when it comes to water, particularly in farming. So traditionally, about half the irrigation on farms is just literally by flooding the fields, which is massively wasteful to water. So more irrigation technologies coming through. On the demand side, which is, we talked about engagement, we've been doing a lot of engagement, particularly in the last 18 months, and one of our focus points with our companies, the engagement is around reducing demand for water, and that goes to the utilities as much as anything else. So again, this year, you may be familiar, some of you, there was a major water crisis in Manila. So we've engaged with 2 of the companies in Manila, 2 listed utilities in Manila, Manila Water being one, Metro Pacific being another, really encouraging them more on the water usage side rather than on the supply side. So that's been pretty successful, I would say, from that perspective. And then and the rest is pretty self-evident: diagnostic equipment, metering equipment, leak detection. All of these areas are all sort of required from that perspective. How we define the universe of stocks of 160, I'll leave you to read yourself at the bottom of this slide. So where does that lead us? I suppose from an alpha or from an investment case, because all investors are increasingly, they want impact more and more, but obviously people expect a financial return. So this is what gives you the financial return. This is how we define our water universe. There is no water index, there's no water sector in the MSCI world. So this is over 20 years we've defined it in this way. It's a universe of about 162 stocks. We have an actively managed portfolio of about 45. And they come across three sort of sectors from our perspective. Utilities, which is what everybody typically thinks about, and they can be in emerging markets and developed markets. They tend to be the defense in your portfolio, lower beta, higher yielding, regulated type assets. The infrastructure in the middle, which is huge, and infrastructure goes across developing markets as much as developed. So remember, 50% of the water in developed markets is leaking right now. All those pipes need to be replaced at some stage. And this crisis, again, is coming. It's just going to get worse. They tend to be more cyclical. They tend to be more capital-intensive type companies. And then on the right-hand side, for a sector that, again, I agree, it's not very sexy. It doesn't sound sexy. Water doesn't. But the technologies, there's some pretty cool technologies go on with some of the companies in the technological side. So that's kind of the universe of stocks that our three portfolio managers live with day in, day out. So just just talk about the performance side, water does work. I mean, there's this sort of push you get all the time about if you're going into impact or if you're going into responsible investing, you're giving up alpha. All this slide shows is you're not. Water has delivered pretty strong alpha over the world index consistently over a long period of time. So when it comes to the other side, which is the impact side, you're probably familiar with, how do you get impact? I suppose historically 20 or 30 years ago when it came to responsible investing, people talked about negative screening. So it was all about negative screening. It then moved a little bit to ESG integration. Do you consider ESG in your process? When you're picking stocks, do you give a score to the ESG as much as you do to the end market on the companies? But more and more, and we integrate ESG, so we engage with all our companies and we give them an E, an S and a G score in terms of how we rate them. And not all companies are strong on G, even if they're in the water index, they can still be poor on governance. Typically they're all strong. But the advantage of a narrow thematic strategy is when it comes to impact, and this is the difference, I suppose, to the broader debate in a way, is that when it comes to impact, by their definition, how we define a universe of stocks, they're hugely impactful. They're very, very strong, and I'll show you one way we've measured that. So the impact is very strong when you invest in a very focused strategy, I guess, thematically. ESG, as I say, it's like any broad index, you rate them yourself. And engagement, it's funny listening to the broad engagement debate from Sustainalytics. As an asset owner, I suppose, as an investment manager and as a big shareholder in many of the companies, we definitely can comment on much stronger responses, much stronger impact, certainly from our experience. So we've engaged in something like 33 companies globally in the last 12 months. We monitor those engagements, and we've definitely had impact, either on our own or collaboratively through a number of the big global collaboration agreements. So engagement, I would say, don't underestimate it. It's very, very powerful. And the more investors are sort of having forums like this where we pool our collective assets, the more companies are listening. So that's either through direct engagement. If we don't get positive responses back, we definitely use our proxy votes more and more. So we kind of map every year how many votes we go against management. So that's up again this year. So we've globally voted something like 9% against management globally in all our proxies. So it's definitely an area that is probably in terms of second derivative of momentum. Engagement's definitely positive and working. Still a long way to go, obviously. So in terms of, I suppose, Johan sort of asked, could we talk about the opportunities and the threats or the issues with it? I suppose the opportunities are, firstly, as an asset owner through publicly listed equities, you are providing capital. There is capital required. We've talked about the trillions of capital that's required out there. Not all of that is going to come through the public equity market. Some will definitely come through just as it does historically, public funding. Most water utilities are municipally owned. They're funded by the taxpayer, and therein lies one of the issues, because globally there is an issue with water. People seem to feel like they're entitled to free water. It's free, so therefore the notion of paying for water is globally an issue. So that limits the budgets for municipalities. If a local mayor wants to increase the price of water and there's an election coming up, that's not pretty good either if you want to get re-elected. So that's a structural issue when it comes to water, and particularly as long as water is publicly owned. So therein lies a debate about should water be more privatised rather than publicly owned. You can absolutely change behaviour through engagement, and that's something I've already talked about. You know, in terms of, and it was one of the debates we've been having at Johan, you know, in terms of additionality of investing in already listed companies. For me, you know, we see continually add on, you know, new rounds of funding from companies. They want another rights issue, they have another placing because they have another new technology they want to deploy or research or develop. And I think absolutely we play a part in that whole area. The other thing we do, and I think asset owners are doing, and associations like this are doing, and investment managers are doing, is just profiling water scarcity issues more and more. So the public still don't get it. I kind of agree with that, but they're getting there. So the more we profile, the more we discuss, the more white papers we write, the more reports we write, the better. And there's a chart actually. I'll just skip on a little bit. I want to show you this because this is a key slide. This is probably the best thing that's happened in the last 20 years. And again, I think there's reference in the AP7 report. But every year in Davos, there's a survey at the end of the conference from all the industrial leaders and the good and the great at the political level. What are the 5 greatest risks in the world? So the great news is, in the last, you can see the blue, the dark blue, the last 3 years, they're finally getting it. They're finally getting it at a political level and at an industrial leader level. And why that matters is because they'll spend. So they didn't care about any of these issues up to the last 3 or 4 years. But we're seeing it. Our companies are noting pickup in order books and all the rest. So don't underestimate how important that is in terms of that sort of bridesmaid coming to the altar. And a lot of it is purely because politicians have been losing their jobs because they've had water crisis in their cities. So when it comes to our manifestation of impact, and this is one of the challenges we've had, so up to about 2 years ago when clients asked us, talk us about impact, what's the impact of our portfolio, what's the impact of our companies we're invested in, we answered it sort of anecdotally. So we gave something like this. We'll go through, here's 6 companies in the portfolio, here's what they're doing anecdotally. They may have or may not have some metrics around how much water they saved or how many new homes they provided water to in Manila or in Sao Paulo or wherever, but it was quite anecdotal. We had no portfolio solution, I suppose, to that. So we at KBI 2 years ago, the portfolio managers and the responsible investing committee pioneered our measurement of impact at a portfolio level. So we came up with what's now called the revenue adjusted sustainability score. So basically we bottom up worked out every company in the portfolio, took their end market exposures and weighted that at a portfolio level to see what percentage of the revenues are positively impacting on attaining SDG 6. And not every activity is positive. Some are negative, some are neutral. So we absolutely did this bottom up across the portfolio, and we reran the same exercise this year. So it's our way of doing it. Nobody's saying it's the right way to do it, but it's certainly a very transparent way of doing it. So what this 71.6% effectively means is that if you gave us a portfolio of $10 million to invest, you could say that 72% of the revenues of that portfolio are directly and positively impacting on achieving SDG 6 and the various subcomponents of SDG 6. So it's powerful. I mean, we did a very, very crude analysis similarly at an MSCI World Index, and the answer is something like 6 or 7%. So it's a pretty powerful impact if you look at it from that perspective. And again, there's probably better ways of doing this and refining it, which again, we're talking with Johan and his team about. Is there, could we refine this in different ways? And we're quite open to that. But this is what I suppose people are looking for more and more: measurements of impact, measurements of engagement, and just having a good cohabitation between not just financial returns but also impact. So just a couple of comment summary points for you there, but in terms of time, I should just finish there, and if there's any questions, thank you for your attention.
So let me start just by, if someone here in the audience is a global investor but still don't have any thematic water investments, what would be your, what can you do for a portfolio, from a portfolio perspective?
Well, historically, so our first clients back in the early 2000s were just investing in water primarily as a source of alpha. They said because the water industry, and I should have said it, the water industry is growing faster than the global economy. The earnings of the water industry are growing faster than the earnings of the MSCI World Index. So I would say as an investment, you're able to buy higher growth at a cheaper valuation. So it's a source of alpha in your global equity bucket. It also gives you diversification, and it actually gives you less volatility. And that was where a lot of people put money for the first 10 or 15 years. In the last 5 years, we've seen a swing where people get that, but they also want more and more ESG, responsible investing, impact, depending on where people lie on that spectrum. So, and we've done studies to show if you add 5% or 10% or 15% of water investments to your global equity portfolio, here's the type of better risk-adjusted return profile you'll get. It's more volatile on a yearly basis because obviously we have a 99% active share versus the world index. So don't beat me up if you have a poor 3 months or 6 months, it'll come back.
So from an investment perspective, it can give great value. And if we then go over to the sustainability perspective, you did ESG rating of your companies, but you emphasize the impact aspect. Yeah. And if you look at it, just impact is impact. You can have water, you can have energy efficiency, you can have other things. Is there anything particular about water as an impact thematic investment?
Well, to me, we do clean energy funds and food. I mean, the most positive thing about water over anything else is there's no substitution for water. And I think from an impact point of view, we need to keep reminding ourselves of this. You can live without clean energy for a while. You can continue to live off fossil fuels or whatever you want to do. You can't live without water. So even within those 17 SDGs, surely SDG 6 should be the most important. So to me as an investor, that's probably what I think is unique about it. What's poor about it is like trying to sell water. It's boring. The average company in our portfolio is 62 years old. So if I'm talking to you about our clean energy portfolio, it's sexier. The companies weren't around 6 years ago or 7 years ago or 8 years ago, and they're doing cool stuff. But that's as investors, you've got to just look at back to your first question, what kind of a risk return profile does this give you? And water is really good.
And what do you think this thing that Tutti mentioned, that you never get married, it's the second fiddle syndrome? Why is that?
Well, because we're getting away with it. We're getting away with it because again, she also mentioned that water is a local issue. It's a global problem, but it's a local issue. So the developed world to date has got away with it because we have a pipe network in the ground that's there for over 100 years in many cases. It's 50% leaking, but we're getting away with it. But I think once that starts to collapse,
we have that in Sweden too.
Then
leaking infrastructure.
Then it becomes an issue, and I think we could be here in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, but it's coming. And then in developing world, in a way you don't miss what you didn't have. But it's back to my politicians thing. So if you look at Modi in India in his most recent election, he's now promised to have clean drinking water tapped to every home in India by 2030. Now, will he achieve it? Probably not. But even if he gets halfway there, that's huge. Trudeau in Canada is talking about doubling the investments in water by 2030. In China, and China gets it. I would say of all the global, from our perspective, China is probably the one country that gets the water issue. So they're now going into their 13th 5-year plan. The last 5-year plan, water was top 2, top 3. They was 760 billion budget the last time round. The next one round, they expect to spend even more on water. So it's happening, I think, from a top-down point of view. And I think bottom-up, it's just going to happen because we're going to have more Cape Towns and more Stockholms or whatever. So
California, yeah.
California, yeah.
And final question before we take some from the audience too. You touched upon this topic that we're going to talk more about in a few minutes, that everybody expects water to be free, but it's not. So just a brief comment. What do you think about that? Solutions, future?
It's really tricky. I mean, people do psychologically believe, because it's like air, there's an abundance of it out there, you're entitled to it. It's free. So politically, politicians, as I say, we had it in Ireland. We nearly lost the government. The government nearly fell 3 years ago because they were going to bring in local water charges. And there was a major revolt, and they backed off in the end. And the whole budget was to get that budget in place to spend on the creaking infrastructure and to put new pipelines from where water is. And typically Ireland's no different to China or anywhere else. Where most water isn't where the population lives. So you need to pipe it there. So it's
hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. And I don't know what the solution. Some countries are far more advanced than this, but they tend to be more the small regional rather than big nations.
So any brief questions from the audience?
Well, firstly, thanks for a very inspiring presentation. Just a very brief question on the measurement of impact. I think many of us are keen to hear just a little bit more on how you do that and the data used. And just a question regarding whether you are benchmarking that or looking at some of the global UN-related sort of progress reports on water, for instance, just to make sure whether they're aligned or not.
Yeah. So it's not aligned to the UN. We probably took a kind of risky view at the time that the UN SDGs would become a benchmark. So back 2 or 3 years ago, there was no view whatsoever as to how you'd measure impact in water. Thankfully, it seems to be moving that way. So we'll probably look more at what you're asking in terms of the second question. In terms of how we did it, we have a massive spreadsheet. We literally stock by stock went through the 45 stocks in the portfolio, and we have something like 85 end markets across the x-axis, if you like, where they supply. So it could be the energy industry, it could be municipal water, it could be residential, it could be farming, it could be emerging market, it could be Chinese utilities, And then we took company by company, what percentage of your revenues was attributable to each of those end markets. We put a positive, negative, or neutral to each of those end markets. So if you're selling pumps to the energy industry, as Pentair do, that's a negative. So the 10% of your revenues that goes there, we say that's a negative to SDG 13, climate action, for example. If you're selling water reuse technology to a municipality, that's positive. We'll give you a positive to SDG 6, etc., etc. And we weighted that out at a portfolio level. So it's very bottom up. It required a lot of engagement with the companies, I should say, because if you look at the annual accounts of companies and all the rest, you won't find that information. So it's like everything in terms of sustainability. Companies, that's the other thing from an engagement point of view. It's not just about carbon. Carbon's the most advanced. So your second question on carbon is easy. Everybody sort of has a common way of doing carbon. People don't have a common way of measuring water. So that's our way of doing it. We in no way are saying it's the right way, or we think it's a pretty good way, but we're happy to engage with people in terms of how to improve it.
Thanks.
So to be able to cut very quickly then, and after that we take the last.
Yeah, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I'm sort of one of the global investors. I haven't started investing in water yet. But one thing that I find is the difficulty sort of handling the regulatory risk. What is happening, for example, in the UK, which makes us, not sort of able at the moment to look at water investments in UK, given the government and Brexit and all of whatever they're doing over there. So how are you sort of handling the regulatory risk?
Well, I think in terms of regulatory risk, as an investment sector, the regulatory risk in water is really good. So if you take the UK, we'd say the UK is the best regulated water industry in the world. It's a very transparent process. The regulator has a 5-year cycle. Stocks typically get nervous into that regulatory cycle. We tend to be underweight, so we're active managers, I suppose. We work around that. So the regulated side is pretty good in terms of the developed markets. When it comes to the emerging markets, they're not regulated. So the nature of the companies in regulated markets for utilities, they tend to be less yield and more growth, whereas the developed countries tend to be more yield, lower beta. But the second part of what you mentioned is the political risk. So the UK politically right now has quite a bit of political risk. So we're very underweight the UK utilities and have been for the last 2 years. They look extremely attractive from an investment perspective, but there's huge political risk. So we prefer sort of invest elsewhere right now. So it's what the team do every day, I suppose, but it was a good question from that perspective. Historically, I think when Margaret Thatcher, the UK did privatise, and they privatised 15 different utilities. There's only 3 remaining. The other 12 have been taken over by infrastructure funds or Middle Eastern infrastructure funds or whatever. So, and they also have these political questions.
And we have seen sort of look into some investments where they actually lost quite a lot of money on these water investments just because of the regulatory risk, and now they're underweighted because of that. But it's a difficult environment.
Okay, thank you. So final applause for thank you. And now we will switch to Swedish, so we can summarize what the conclusions are. If you have to go, that's you already warned me. Så då övergår vi till svenska och vi ska ha en sista diskussion här om den här konstiga situationen då för investerare, att man har gott om kapital man vill sätta och det finns stora behov, men någonting gör att det inte finns några investeringsmöjligheter. Varsågod Lotta.
Jag kan faktiskt, I can take a little brief introduction in English before we switch over to Swedish. I'm here with Per Dahlheim, who is the CEO of the Swedish Water and Wastewater Association in Sweden. And we will have a talk about the Swedish situation and investment case here, which will be really interesting. But to give you a brief background on why we are focusing now on Sweden, in 2017, we initiated a study within the framework of Swedish Investors for Sustainable Development, which is a SIDA-initiated project bringing together investors focusing on the global goals. And we were a group of investors. It was us, it was AP3, it was SPP, it was the Church of Sweden and Skandia, who were talking about, so how can we contribute to SDG 6? What can we invest in? And the impression was that there was a lot of investment-willing capital, but there was not that many investment opportunities. So we decided to commission a study into the situation in Sweden. As we were Swedish investors, we decided to look at Sweden to begin with. And this is the study. It can be downloaded from our website at AP7 if you're interested in reading it. There's an abstract in English as well. And what the study found was that there are great investment needs in Swedish water infrastructure, and there are a lot of investment-willing capitals, but there are some barriers to this, and that is really outside of the investment community's reach. They're political and they're technological. And firstly, there are very few projects started. Municipalities are unwilling to borrow money to start projects on maintaining infrastructure. And as we heard from Noel and also Tytti, citizens are not really willing to pay for water services. There's also a lack of competence and capacity, and there are legal constraints also to invest. And the interesting thing was that when we did this study, then we were lucky in Stockholm to have the Swedish Stockholm International Water Institute here, who every year arranges the World Water Week. So we sort of get in touch with a lot of different international actors. And the thing is that when you look at other countries, OECD countries and countries in Africa, it's basically the same situation. The barriers are the same. So with that said, I will switch to Swedish. And welcome Per Dahlheim, som är VD på Svenskt Vatten.
Stämmer bra det.
Och tänkte bara kort, kan du bara kort berätta vad är Svenskt Vatten och hur är liksom vattenförsörjningen organiserad? Hur funkar den i Sverige egentligen?
Svenskt Vatten är en branschorganisation som representerar alla kommunala VA-huvudmän. Det vill säga kommuner och de bolag eller förvaltningar eller kommunförbund som ser till att vi får ett dricksvatten. Och också tar hand om reningen. Det vill säga reningsverk och dagvattenhantering. Och vi pratade, bara som ett exempel, vi pratade om reuse här innan, återanvändning. Och bor ni i Stockholm så är jag helt övertygad om att ni har druckit avloppsvatten från någon västeråsare eller Eskilstunabo. Så att vi använder redan idag reuse, för det är faktiskt ett kretslopp. Även fast det liksom är på systemnivå. Vi jobbar med forskning, alltså bygga kunskap, förmedla kunskap, kunskapsförmedling, policy- och påverkansarbete och standardiseringsarbete för branschen. För att måla in branschen lite grann, vad är vi någonstans? Så är det så att det här byggdes ju upp, den här infrastrukturen byggdes upp på 50-60-talet, så mycket annat i Sverige, liksom det stora välfärdssamhället som drog igång. Drivet av bostadskris, miljonprogram känner ni igen, Carlssons tysta vår och miljörörelsen och miljölagstiftning som tryckte på regelverken som ökade kraven på rening och produktion av dricksvatten. Och de här drivande krafterna gjorde att man tillsatte organisationer och en lagstiftning för att liksom drifta det här. Det var statliga medel som man finansierade hela infrastrukturen. Och sen så gav man ansvaret till kommunerna att förvalta det här. Och då har man en förvaltningsorganisation, man har lagstiftning och en taxekonstruktion för hur man ska finansiera den här driften. Och sen har det funkat ganska bra. Funkar ganska bra nu också. Det kommer liksom vatten i kranen 24 timmar om dygnet. Leveransen är optimal. För det mesta. Så att det inte varit något stort problem. Men nu så inser vi ju att nu sitter vi med en ganska gammal infrastruktur. Vi har ett befolkningstryck som liknar det på 50-60-talet. Men nu pratar vi om att bygga hållbara samhällen. Vi pratar inte om miljörörelsen i form av DDT och liknande, utan det är liksom klimatfrågan som sätter tryck. Och regelförändringar och regelverk kommer inte bara lokalt, utan det kanske kommer från EU-nivå eller till och med globala överenskommelser. Så att processen är ungefär densamma, fast en helt annan dimension. Och här står vi nu med en infrastruktur som är ganska föråldrad. Man är skitbra på att drifta den, men inte så bra på att utveckla och liksom, reinvestera och nyinvestera.
Men är vatten verkligen en stor fråga i Sverige? Vi har ju så mycket vatten. Vi kan ju inte direkt prata om någon vattenkris här, eller?
Nej, sanningen är den att ytvattenförekomster så är Sverige en stor makt. Alltså vi har 24% av allt ytvatten i Europa finns i Sverige. Det är ganska fascinerande. Så att nej, vatten är inget problem så, utifrån ett råmaterial. Men däremot så kan man fundera på hur vi skyddar och säkerställer att vi har ett råmaterial, ett råvatten över tid. Det är det ena. Och det andra är ju faktiskt att vi har ju kris lokalt. Vi sa att problemen, de finns globalt och lösningar lokalt, men det finns också lokala tydliga bekymmer. Ta hela sydöstra Sverige där man faktiskt hade en nödslakt liksom som tror jag kostade ungefär samhället eller bönder ungefär 5 miljarder. Det satte ett tryck på skogen och granbarkborrar som kostade samhället ytterligare 1 miljard. Och helt plötsligt blir det samhällsfrågor. Så att jag skulle nog säga att det är ett smygande problem. Den är här liksom. Det är ingenting som kommer framåt, utan det är här.
Men den här vattenbristen som vi upplevde då, de här torra somrarna, beror det på att vattnet har liksom försvunnit? Att vi har pumpat upp allt grundvatten? Eller vad beror den här vattenbristen på egentligen?
Jättebra fråga. För när man pratade förra sommaren var ju det väldigt uppenbart. Då pratade man det är vattenbrist. Och då med tanke på det så nej, det var ju inte det alla gånger. Alltså i 2/3 av de fallen som man inrättade bevattningsförbud så var det en kapacitetsbrist. Men vi pratar om en vattenbrist. Så att förmågan att producera vatten, det var den som inte hängde med. Sen kan man alltid fundera på utifrån hur man dimensionerar anläggningen och vad som är effektivt i samhället. Ska vi ha en infrastruktur som klarar en veckas jättevärme i juli varannat år? Alltså ska vi bygga anläggningar för det taket? Det kanske inte är rimligt. Då måste vi pratade tidigare om någon annan inne på styrmedel. Det ena är styrmedel för beteendeförändringar och det andra är att säkerställa att vi liksom har bra system eller infrastruktur för att liksom, producera vatten.
Det där är ju intressant, att man producerar vatten. För det tror jag, liksom, gemene man tänker inte på att det är ett producerat livsmedel. Det bara finns där.
Ja, det är verkligen ett hantverk. Det är en processindustri om man pratar vattenverk som producerar vatten. Och sen så har vi reningsverken som ska ta hand om det i slutändan. Samhället, eller tätortens föroreningar. Vilket är en förutsättning för att man ska kunna snurra tillbaka det där i kretsloppet sen då, och dricka det igen.
Precis. Så vi har egentligen ett livsmedel som vi använder till alla möjliga användningsområden.
Ja, då kommer vi in på utmaningar framåt. För egentligen så är det lite grann så att vem här inne tvättar bilen med fläskfilé? Det är ingen som skulle få den tanken. Men vi använder ju faktiskt livsmedel att tvätta bilen med. Har ni tänkt på det? Eller händerna, eller vad det nu är. Så att det här med att nu sitter vi i en infrastruktur. Våra ledningar är 5 varv runt jorden. Och det är klart att vi har förnyelsetakt på dem på 200 år. Att bygga ytterligare 10-15 varv är ju inte görbart, utan vi måste hitta andra typer av lösningar. Men en sak är ju verkligen att vilka ska ha vilket vatten? Vad är det för vatten som vi ska ha till lantbruket för bevattning? Vad är det för vatten vi ska leverera till de som ska tvätta bilen? Och vad ska vi dricka? Och det är olika krav och därmed kanske olika typer av lösningar.
Men det här målar ju upp en bild av en väldigt intressant och komplex fråga och som man vardagligen inte riktigt tänker på, att liksom vatten skulle kunna ha olika kvaliteter och sådär. Men varför har vi det inte så? Och varför görs det ingenting för att vara mer effektiv i vattenanvändningen i Sverige? Vad är liksom problemen?
Ja, det är en jättebra fråga och ganska svår. Några här var inne på det tidigare. Jag tror att ett svar på den är att det inte varit så angeläget. Det har liksom funkat. Och för Sverige så har det funkat att vi har så mycket vatten att livsmedelskvaliteten på vattnet har vi kunnat använda till allting. Det har liksom inte varit ett problem. Och då har det inte varit angeläget att bygga infrastruktur eller tekniska lösningar för att hantera ett problem som inte finns, så att säga. Men nu sitter vi ju där. Och vi ser ju att enligt våra beskrivningar så årligen i Sverige ungefär då, så investeras det 12-14, vi ser att det är på väg uppåt, miljarder årligen i reinvesteringar och nyinvesteringar i infrastrukturen. Det skulle behöva dubblas, minst. Så att vi har en lång väg kvar. Men ändå så fattas inte besluten. Och i Sverige är ju det här avgiftsfinansierat och på lokal nivå. Så förvaltningen är ju verkligen lokal. Ansvaret ligger lokalt. Och då kan det vara som politiskt mod. Det konkurrerar, i och med att det är en kommunal verksamhet så konkurrerar kanske med investering i skola. Och lyssnar vi på den allmänna debatten här nu, vad är det som trycker politikerna att fatta beslut? Ja, våra barn har inte dagisplatser. Vården fungerar inte. Och det är där kanske då som man gör investeringarna. Vattnet, ja men det funkar okej idag. Vi kan alltid skjuta på det lite grann. Men då är vi inne på det här med problemet att det är infrastruktur. Man kan kanske likna det med järnvägen. Det tar ju liksom 20-30 år innan man ser problemet. Det är idag. Så tar det kanske 20-30 år innan man har löst det. Så att det finns liksom ingen tid att vänta.
Nej. Och vad kan man då göra? För det är ju en komplex bild som du säger. Och återigen så kommer vi tillbaka till att vatten inte har högsta prioritet. Dagis och sjukvård och skola och all annan kommunal aktivitet konkurrerar ut det. Det finns lite betalningsvilja för vatten i Sverige, så att det är också en fråga om liksom medvetenhet hos opinionen, att vi ska våga. Vi hörde ju från Noel att Irlands regering nästan föll när de försökte höja vattentaxorna. Jag menar, det är ju verkligen ett stort problem. Så jag förstår att det är väldigt komplext, men vad finns det för lösningar och hur skulle vi som liksom investerare kunna bidra till att lösa det här underskottet eller underhållsbehovet som vi ser i Sverige?
Det är också, jag tror inte det finns en lösning, och det gör det också att man kan bli passiv. Alltså frågan är så komplex att man kan liksom bli sittande på stolen. Så ett viktigt medskick är ju ändå att försöka börja göra saker i rätt riktning. Och det ni gör här idag, alltså samla ett gäng kring frågeställning, det gör ju att den blir mer aktuell. Det är jätteviktigt, alltså bilda opinion.
Just det.
Bygga kunskap och kompetens är ett annat område. För vi ser ju, det är inte bara det att det saknas pengar kan man uppleva, men det är faktiskt så att för varje 100-lapp som ändå finns i investeringsbudgeterna så gör man bara av med 60 spänn. Alltså genomförandegraden är 60 kronor i Sverige.
Hos kommunerna?
Ja, och det är hos de större aktörerna. Tar vi dem lite mindre, och Sverige är ju liksom, finns det många mindre små kommuner, då är det 50 spänn.
Och vad beror det på då? Att man inte lyckas investera de pengarna man ändå har?
Genomförande kapacitet och kompetens. Man har inte personella resurser eller kunskap att kunna fixa det här på kommun, men också på utförarsidan. Särskilt kanske nu när det varit sånt tryck i samhällsbyggandet i hela samhällsbyggandet. Så bara det att få tag i entreprenörer eller de som är duktiga på att bygga ett vattenverk, vilket gjordes för 50 år sedan, så det finns liksom ingen som har som lever, som har kvar den kunskapen, eller på att säga. Men det är vi gör någonting nytt här.
Ja.
Liksom, så att,
Borde det inte ligga på kommunerna? Borde det vara en statlig ansvar, vattenförsörjning i Sverige? För det pratade vi också om tidigare med vem man vänder sig till. Vem har det övergripande ansvaret för vattenförsörjningen i Sverige?
Ja, och jag tror att i och med att det har varit vatten och tagit för självklart, så har vi liksom en ganska otydlig ansvarsfördelning på statlig nivå. Det är en SMHI, SGU, vi har Vattenmyndigheten, Länsstyrelsen, Livsmedelsverket, en rad olika myndigheter som liksom kommer in i vattenfrågorna på lite olika sätt. Och det skapar lite bekymmer. Så ett tydligare ansvar när det gäller vattenförvaltningsfrågan och se det som en resurs i samhället. Det behövs. Och det är att förvalta liksom vattnet som resurs. Vem ska lantbrukaren ha, eller ska vi ha det till att dricka, eller när det liksom börjar ta slut? Så det är det ena. Sen finns det ju ett bekymmer när det gäller det statliga ansvaret kanske lokalt. För någonstans är det ju lokalt som bekymren uppstår. Och då kan det ibland vara bra att ha när det gäller själva liksom produktionen av vatten, att den också behöver finnas någon form av ansvar lokalt. Men det kan nog bli lite mer lokalregionalt. Så samverkan mellan kommuner tror vi är en framgångsfaktor. För det visar sig att har man ett kundunderlag på över 50 000 invånare, så är man mycket mer kompetent att göra investeringarna och förvalta sitt vatten.
Just det. Så det handlar om kompetensförsörjning. Sen fanns det ju en annan del som vi upptäckte, och det var ju att det finns en lagstiftning, vattentjänstlagen, som egentligen hindrar privata investeringar i vatten och privat ägande av vatten och uttag av vinster och allt det där. Hur ser du på lagstiftningen? Är det något som händer där? Pågår det någon utveckling?
Ja, vi trycker på ganska hårt för det är ju ett bekymmer. Vattentjänstlagen som jag beskrev, den är ju egentligen baserad på att klara den här driften infrastrukturen som man satt upp på 50-60-talet. Så på något vis en affärsmodell för att hantera det. Och då står det där att man får, det är VA-kollektivet som ska stå för alla kostnader, det vill säga avgiften, och det måste gå tillbaka, det är nollsummespel. Så det innebär att man får inte bygga upp en kassa för att kunna ta investeringar eller delar av investeringarna. Och det skapar ju bekymmer. Man får fondera i 3 år när det gäller nyinvesteringar. Och då blir det ett bekymmer när vi pratar om det är mångmiljardinvesteringar vi pratar om över kanske en infrastruktur som ska hålla 50, 60, 70, 100 år. Och här måste ju reglerna bara ändras. Och även när det gäller reinvesteringarna, för nyanskaffningsvärdet på det vi har här, det är 800 miljarder kronor ungefär i Sverige. Men det är avskrivet sedan länge. Dessutom var det ju statliga medel, så det finns liksom inte de kommunala böckerna. Och det gör att som politiker då är det mer intressant att bygga nytt än att ta hand om det som vi faktiskt har, som vi också måste hantera.
Ja, vi skulle kunna prata hur länge som helst om det här, men jag tror vi har lite ont om tid. Jag ska ställa en sista fråga till dig. Jag tror att ni kan komma in med frågor sen till Per. Vad har du för medskick till oss investerare? För vi, som sagt, som jag sa, vi är ju väldigt villiga att investera, att hitta investeringsmöjligheter i svensk vatteninfrastruktur. Vad har du för medskick till oss? Vad kan vi tänka på? Vad skulle vi kunna bidra med?
Och vilken jultomteönskelista. Då får man prestationskrav. Nej, jag tror att dels att göra sådana här typer av event tycker jag är jättebra. Sen tror jag faktiskt att det kan vara bra att försöka rikta sig mot politiken och beslutsfattare. Att försöka fånga in dem och få dem att förstå att det finns inte en vård, skola och omsorg som fungerar utan vatten. Inte ett samhälle som fungerar utan vatten. Och så att de får lite argument att också ta en del modiga politiska beslut. Där behöver vi hjälp, och jag tror att där har ni ett inspel att göra. Sen tror jag också att det här mötet, vi var inne på kompetens, det handlar inte bara om pengar. Och då gäller det att fundera som investerare, vad är det för andra faktorer som vi skulle kunna hjälpa till och skruva på? Lite nudging på de områdena för att frigöra så att vi kan investera där vi vill. Och då är det där med kompetensfrågan som jag verkligen tror att man skulle kunna fundera på. Kan man skapa testbäddar, bidra till det, där man kan möta liksom både de som har behovet och de som sitter på lösningar, så de kan mötas på ett tydligare sätt, plattformar för det. Kan man bidra in i forskning och utveckling på något vis? Kan man hjälpa till att trycka på forskningspropositionen så att det kommer mer riktade medel mot vattenfrågorna till exempel?
Så en uppmaning helt enkelt från dig till oss investerare att lyfta blicken från våra portföljer och tänka lite större som en samhällsmedborgare, att vi är en aktör i samhället som ska bidra till att underlätta för i slutändan kunna hitta något att investera i.
Exakt så.
Bra.
Ja, jag tycker vi börjar med att applådera deltagarna. Och sen så tänkte jag faktiskt föreslå, för att vi ska hinna med alla här innan tiden tar slut, att ni som har frågor till Per och Lotta, ta gärna dem. Men först så ska vi lyssna på CV och CDP och Svesif som har några famous last words. Välkomna upp här.
Just to add to the bilingual confusion, I think I will spend a couple of minutes just doing this brief intro together with Emma Henningsson. My name is Josefin Gustafsson. I come from SIWI, the Stockholm International Water Institute. And we wanted to just bridge basically the discussions of today with the broader work that we've been doing on water over the last few months. And it's nice to see so many of the familiar faces, the usual suspects in the crowd. But really what we wanted to do is just to bring the discussion from today, which I think is very relevant. Just I don't need to reiterate the importance of water. Paris covered much of that. We've also heard some of the really key figures that are coming out just in terms of looking at the importance of addressing water risk, which I think Noel also elaborated on a little bit on the water risk that is also highlighted through the World Economic Forum's annual reports, which this is, of course, one of the areas of urgencies where we see that we need to do more. Just one additional figure that I think is important to keep in mind is, of course, that we're looking at this projected 40% gap between freshwater demand and the sustainable supply of water looking at 2030, which is really literally around the corner. And it's not just an issue for the future. As we know, CDP has figures for, I think, for last year showing that the financial related losses around water is around $36 billion US dollars. So really, when it comes to the urgency to act, we know that we need to do more. So that's also where SIWI, together with Svesif and CDP, we've been working with several of you in dialogue to try to raise the importance and the agenda around water within the Swedish investors community. And we're also working closely together with some of the ongoing initiatives such as SIDA's, Swedish Investors for Sustainable Development, of course. But what we've seen is that in addition to the work that we have been doing in terms of gathering and convening seminars around the topic, we also feel that there's a need for a little bit more of hands-on concrete type of work. So we're looking at a new project which we wanted to sort of plant in this seminar today just as a sort of a concrete next step, and just to highlight that this would be an opportunity for us to engage with you also in terms of navigating this relatively complex, not just water risk environment, but also in terms of looking at some of the initiatives and the global tools that are there. So I would just hand over with that brief intro to Emma to just give the highlights of the project we're planning.
Yes, and I'm very linguistically challenged now.
I understand that and I'm sorry.
Jag var förberedd på svenska, så jag kanske drar på svenska trots att det är jag som är engelsmannen. Och jag då representerar Svesif i det här sammanhanget, där jag är med i en grupp som är intresserad av vattenfrågan. Så att det här idén om att ha ett projekt kring vatten har diskuterats, och där vi tror att vi har kommit fram till ett skiss på en projektplan. Och där vill jag kanske framförallt påpeka att vi utgår ifrån vad som kan vara värdefullt för Svesif-medlemmarna. Och där kände vi att det finns, trots alla seminarier som har gått över de åren, så finns det fortfarande ett behov av att lyfta frågan och diskutera riskerna, förstå sig på riskerna. Och sen det finns en uppskör av olika verktyg och system som man kan ta till nytta av. Så att det här projektet syftar inte på att återfinna hjulet, utan verkligen försöka på ett svenskt sätt sammanfatta vad som finns och hjälpa investerare att hitta
de verktygen eller lösningar som kan funka på varje organisation. Så att förslaget är då ett projekt som går på 3 olika steg. Den första då är runt att sammanställa riskbilden. Vad är riskerna? Vad är investerarnas roll och vilka möjligheter finns det att påverka bolags vattenrisksarbete? Det andra delen då, och där ska vi självklart dra nytta av alla intressanta forskning och data som finns hos olika, inte minst CDP, men i olika rapporter. Och sen är steg 2 att kartlägga de verktygen som finns och försöka dra nytta av de erfarenheter som Swesifs medlemmarna redan har, eller kanske jobba tillsammans med vissa Swesifs medlemmar för att testa sig fram på olika verktyg. Och försöka hjälpa på något sätt kartlägga vad som finns och hur det skulle kunna användas. Och sen det tredje steget att försöka dra ihop det här till guidelines, riktlinjer, rekommendationer, tips till Swesif-medlemmar. Så det är på den fronten vi tänker oss jobba framåt. Och det finns redan vissa som har uttryckt intresse för att aktivt vara med i det här projektet. Och om det är flera så hör av er. Och under tiden så kommer vi såklart hålla er uppdaterade i vad som pågår. Och efterlyser vi guinea pigs, som man säger på engelska, försökskaniner. Till exempel så kanske vi går ut med en efterlysning för just det specifikt. Har jag missat någonting?
Nej, toppen.
Ja, toppen. Så det ska vi bara informera om. Tack.
Bra, vad härligt. Så då fortsätter vi kanske på svenska. Tiden håller på att rinna ut. Alla som känner att ni behöver springa till jobbet kan göra det nu. Och de som vill stanna och har några uppföljande frågor som vi inte hann med är ju förstås välkomna till det också. Vi kommer vara kvar några minuter i alla fall innan vi också ska gå och jobba. Tack för idag.